Okay, so it is 3 minutes past 3, time for Talking Books. So, Paul, welcome to Yamba and to TLC and Studio One. And thank you for bringing your book. And it's The Criminal Class, and it's subtitled Memoir of a Prison Teacher. So do you want to just give us a little bit of the background in terms of the experiences, I suppose, that you're drawing on for your book?
Yeah, sure. I'm a teacher by trade, and I worked in the prison system for about 7 years. I was working in Sydney at Silverwater Jail, and I also worked up in the north coast of New South Wales, up this way at Grafton Jail. And I just wrote a collection of stories about sort of based on my experience, and made it into a fictionalised account of a teacher who gets employed in the prison system, and just the different characters that he meets and different situations that arise.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on that idea about it being fiction, because obviously that's a little bit of I want to say it's an interesting kind of a dance around the fact that it's a memoir, but that it's being called fiction. It is based on experience. It's based on a true story. So how do you kind of reconcile, like, what genre it fits into?
Well, it is fictional because stories are blended. There's areas where fact and fiction sort of cross over. But I suppose the part of it that comes across as factual is that it's based on my experiences. So, I knew what the system was like. I know what it's like to be inside one of those classrooms, what it's like to walk through the boom gates, the barbed wire, the encounters with the prisoners. I know sort of how those experiences occur in the real world, and I could then put a story on top of that, so it's authentic. For example, my wife is a nurse, and sometimes we might watch something on the television, and do something medical, and she would say, "Oh, they wouldn't do that," So if someone had been in the prison system as a worker or as a prisoner, and they read something in this story, they would think, yeah, this is how it would have happened.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. So, yeah, that's really interesting, because I thought the whole sort of sense of, I think you say in the prologue that you had a great deal of curiosity about your workplace from people that you would meet, and that they would ask you, what it was like. And I was thinking, oh, don't people sort of have a sense of that just from popular culture, from representations of prisons in popular culture? Because we do see a lot of like movies and whatever. So you would have the same reaction. You would be thinking, well, maybe that's a little bit like for a dramatic effect.
Yeah. So to give you an example, the other night I watched a show on Netflix called The Inside Man, about a prison story, and which was quite well done and well written. But there was one part there where one prisoner was Skyping another prisoner in another jail, and that's just not going to happen.
No, they're not going to have access to that technology.
Well, they wouldn't even be permitted to do that.
No. Yeah. Because I think early on, one of your interesting experiences was somehow ending up with your phone in your pocket when you go for the interview for the job.
Yeah, that's right. And bringing a phone into a jail, there's a sentence, a punishment of up to 3 years imprisonment for that. And I'd accidentally done that. It was in my pocket. No one had asked me about it. Yep. And I got inside, and I was inside the main part of the jail, and I had my phone.
Yeah. Could have been in trouble.
Yes, definitely, for sure.
So I guess what I really want to try and ask you to explain for us is why you wrote the book, because that's sort of heading towards that, I suppose. Obviously, it was a unique kind of a work experience, like a workplace for you.
Yeah, well, one thing, as you said before, I did realise that there's a lot of interest in crime, and a lot of people asked me about the job and what it was like. But it's also I wanted to write it to give a true account of it, and I wanted I understood that I was writing from a perspective that wasn't from normally a prison story is from the police view, or someone does something bad, they chase them, they get them, they put them in jail, or you see it the other way around, someone has that happen to them and then they're the prisoner and then they got to survive in the prison. My book comes from a different angle completely because I'm an outsider going inside. So for me as a writer, I thought, well, the reader then can see it through my eyes because I knew nothing of it walking in the door the first day, and then it all sort of unfolds in front of you. So you get an authentic view of what it's like, but again, I'm not looking at it from a justice, the punishers, and I'm not looking at it from the punished perspective.
So are you really telling the stories of the people who are there, including you,
Yeah.
and including people who have been convicted or on remand, or people who are inside the prison system? Is it more wanting to tell those stories, or is there a broader kind of a political purpose, do you think, to your writing?
Well, I think there's the dual part of that is that, I try to give a human face to everybody, whether they're the guard or whether they're the prisoner, and let people see that as well. And I think on the sort of bigger level, because it's such a big bureaucracy, prisons, and I also wanted to sort of explore some of the issues about whether they are just there for punishment, whether they're for rehabilitation, how much of that, how does that balance out, what are the competing factors?
Yeah.
Because as an educator going in there, you sort of have a view that you can go in there and you might be able to change a lot of it, and you come up against this big system and opposing factions within there, and sort of that becomes another interesting part of the story.
So would you say you were more idealistic about what impact you could have in an educational perspective?
I think probably that's one of the good parts of the book as well for a reader, is that I didn't really have too much of an opinion that I would be able to go and change the world, or that I would be totally ineffective either. I just, the position came up, I thought I'd put my hand up for it. It was more sort of circumstantial rather than by planning, and I think that sort of helps with the story because I don't have any preconceived notions going in.
Yeah, but it's interesting though, because you still do have some comments that I find interesting in terms of just the whole nature and purpose of locking people away, and whether it's to be for punishment or for rehabilitation. And you talk about, they're talking about the importance of language when the whole system or the whole sort of department is called corrections.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really, there's a kind of an irony in there.
Yeah.
To me.
Yes. And they are, to some extent trying to correct, but it's a matter of how that is done. And language, is a big part of it. All the terminology and what the whole place is actually there for. There are psychologists, there are counsellors, teachers, there's a lot of people involved in the rehabilitation, but it's also so many outside factors as well, and the environment that people come from and the environment they go back into, the culture within the prison. So there's it's complex, very complex.
Yeah, I imagine. And there were also some interesting comments that you made in the book about being, I don't know if the word you used was bemused, but I'm guessing at least a bit alarmed by the low levels of literacy that you would come across with people, and then also learning disabilities that maybe hadn't been diagnosed, and that compounded by sometimes people who have backgrounds in the system where they may have a parent who might be from that kind of, may have been incarcerated themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
They might be known to the juvenile, what do you call the
juvenile detention system.
Yeah.
There's a lot who've been through all that, and then they more or less graduate to prison. There are prisoners that you would be talking to, and their father was in jail, their brother was. It's like a family occupation, and
there's a bit of a kicker at the end, isn't there? Which I won't disclose.
Yeah, that's right. And you just see that people are, in that kind of rut or in that cycle. Recidivism rates are high. I sort of roughly, I think if you've been to juvenile detention once, you have a 50% chance of going back there, and the chance then of you going to an adult correctional centre is high. If you've been in an adult correctional centre, then coming out and getting work is tricky. The crime and the money and the gangs and all that involved can draw you back into that system even if you want to change. So
you're really not dealing with just a blank slate that's, someone finds themselves in a prison system and then they're in a classroom with you. It's kind of a bit more complex than that. And the other thing that interested me too was this competing for prisoners to be either at work in the prison or in classes with you. So how did that sort of get resolved?
I'm not sure that it ever actually does get resolved, but yes, prisons. A lot of prisons are working prisons, and so if a prisoner wanted to go to education, education's on in the day when the work's on as well. So there would be, I had overseers ring me up and say, you've got my key worker there in your class, things like that. So. And that person may, have some genuine educational needs that need to be done. Also, they've got a role to fulfil in the jail in that as a worker, but, which is more important, which is going to be long-term more important for that person and for the society. I suppose that's a debate to be had.
Yeah, certainly some complex issues.